Today, we will be viewing the folly of two innocent but ignorant gnomes. Two gnomes who were given a grave task by their grandfathers, one that could save the entirety of Azeroth. Two gnomes whose spirits carried them forward against all odds, but who found themselves lost thanks to that same unbreakable will. To understand how they came to this untimely fate, though, we'll need to view their journey, from its humble beginnings to its tragic end. Our heroes began their journey, like many other gnomes and dwarves, in the frozen mountains of Dunmoreau. But, from the outset, it was clear that these two, Big Red Dog and Help Me the Third, were not like the other aspiring heroes around them. Rather than talking to their peers or finding new equipment, they instead removed their garments to brave the elements with no protection, and left the relative safety of Cold Ridge Valley. Where they were heading? Only they knew. But one thing is for certain. Adventure called to them. With their lack of armor and lack of experience, though, even the smallest of foes proved to be a non-trivial threat. On their way out of the valley, they encountered a single trog that many a gnome would simply scoff at. But for these two, it posed a serious threat, requiring the assistance of the nearby dwarven guards. Now this should have been a warning sign for our heroes, but they pressed forth unfettered, and as luck would have it, another adventurer had cleared out the rest of the tunnel, granting them safe passage towards the dwarven town of Keranos. They didn't stay long though, and the docile fauna of northern Dunmoreau posed no threat to the gnomes. Within no time, they were in the forests of Loch Modan. While many of the nearby creatures were still uninterested in them, this forest did hold danger. Help Me the Third got careless after such a calm journey through the snow, and paid dearly for it. A bear from the forest caught his scent and struck him down, right on the road. For your average adventurer, this would have been the end. But these two gnomes were descended from strong blood. Their grandfathers had made this same journey back in their youth, where they discovered that death in combat didn't hold the same power over them that it did others. Instead, upon being slain, they would be thrust to the nearest spiritual location, and could then climb back inside their body and continue the journey. It was a painful experience every time, but with this power and an unbreakable spirit, Help Me the Third came back to the land of the living, just like his grandfather before him. The two didn't remain in Loch Modan for long, as the entrance to the marshes of the wetlands were very nearby. Thus far, the only poor choice these two gnomes have made was the choice of setting out on this journey in the first place. But, upon entering the wetlands, they would make a choice that would delay their progress greatly. Rushing forward and trying to spend as little time in the marshes as possible, the two gnomes leaped off the very first cliff they saw, intending to use the powers of the spirits to return them to life deeper in the wetlands. They missed. Instead of landing well into the marsh, they both collapsed on the side of that very same mountain, having to run their spirits back multiple times from the graveyard in Loch Modan. Worse yet, Help Me the Third missed the jump, causing even more delays. Even after they were finally reunited, a wild crocolisk thought that gnome sounded like a tasty snack. The spirits, however, took pity this time, and they were able to execute their original plan, returning to the corporeal world deeper into the wetlands. Their goal now was a boat at the western end of the zone, in a place called Menethil Harbor. This boat would take them to the human encampment of Theramore in Dustwallow Marsh, on the continent of Kalimdor. But, to get there, they would still need to survive the marshes, which held many dangerous and hungry creatures. Crocolisks, raptors, murlocs, and even orcs hid amongst the trees and in the water. The two gnomes tried to stay close to the road, where fewer creatures would tread, but this didn't protect them for long. With so many trees and hills, something was bound to find them. And boy, something did. They managed to dodge many crocolisks, but just as many tasted gnome flesh that day. There was even a raptor hidden behind a hill who delighted in such a tasty treat. But, with will unfaltering, and a large amount of luck, our heroes finally made it to Menethil Harbor. They were shocked at how quickly they got there, for they had heard tales of how long it took their grandfathers to make the same journey. But the path was still long, and they still had an entire continent to travel. As a farewell to the Eastern Kingdoms, they met a friendly night elf, also waiting for the same boat. who, after a brief conversation, wished the two lunatic gnomes good luck. They were going to need it. Dustwallow Marsh, a place where dreams and gnomes both go to die. While Big Red Dog and Help Me the Third had faced dangerous wildlife and unfriendly terrain before, Dustwallow Marsh was a new beast. Everywhere they walked, they were on edge. They'd heard that the spiders here are so well camouflaged that someone would never know if they were being stalked until they were already dead. Spiders weren't the only threat in Dustwallow. With a similar atmosphere to the wetlands, crocolisks and raptors also made Dustwallow Marsh their home. However, the harsher environment forced these creatures to adapt and become even faster, increasing their lethality. Everything was faster and more powerful. If there was any hope of surviving angering the wildlife back in the wetlands, that hope was gone here, and gone forever.
Hi there!
The spiders, though, they proved to be just as deadly as the tales had told. Time and time again, the two gnomes would be running peacefully around the marsh, only for one of them to suddenly drop dead. No warning, no indication, only death. At least it was fast. And though the trees and swamps seemed endless, they made it to the other side, to the plains known as the Barrens. The Barrens were known for having an active enemy presence as the Horde roamed the area. But our heroes weren't worried. They knew it was very likely that the orcs, Tauren, and trolls would all be near the crossroads, and not in the deeper, more dangerous southern reaches of the Barrens. Their time in the Barrens was short. Sticking to the road kept most of the creatures from sniffing them out, and the few times that a creature did attack, it was a thunder lizard who surprisingly failed to do lethal damage with its lightning breath, or would often get stuck, unable to attack them from so far away. Blasting through Kalimdor and growing ever closer to their destination, the Short Kings had to make use of an elevator guarded by the Horde to get into the claustrophobic, craggy, cliff-like area known as Thousand Needles. For Thousand Needles, allow me to begin by regaling you all with the tale of the grandfathers of these two gnomes, Clifford and Help Me. Sadly, their story only exists in the memories of their grandchildren now, but the way they tell it is as such. Their grandfathers also set out on this same journey, long ago, during something called a stress test, which they never deigned to enlighten their children to the meaning of. They'd simply wanted to see the world and would let nothing stop them, but they were inexperienced and had nobody guiding them. Much of their journey up to this point was similar to the one you see before you, with the exception of Dustwallow Marsh, where the grandfathers tried to swim across the lake rather than following the road, and they paid the price for it when they encountered an impassable wall of mountains. But Thousand Needles is where the first journey truly became difficult. You see, with all of the high cliffs around, no one can ever see what's lurking around a corner. There are multiple encampments of centaur around, and the only seemingly safe path requires walking directly next to and through a Horde base, as all the other pathways take massive detours, increasing the chance of being attacked by a hyena or even a rogue elemental. Their grandfathers perished many times in Thousand Needles. It took them over an hour to make it through this desolate land, and into the shimmering flats where the wildlife was considerably more spread out. But, along the way, they died to the Horde, to hyenas, elementals, kobold, and even stealthy mountain cougars. But something strange happened for Big Red Dog and Help Me the Third. There was almost nothing in the entirety of Thousand Needles. The only obstacles they faced before reaching the shimmering flats was the Horde base and a single cougar. Aside from those two things, nothing even attempted to eat them, and Thousand Needles was left behind in record time. From here on out, though, the hardest part of the journey lay ahead of them. The three-zone stretch of Tanaris, Ungoro Crater, and Silithus was talked up as being the most dangerous section of land their grandfathers had ever trekked, with Dustwallow Marsh being the most dangerous lake they had swam through. But not even the stories truly prepared this new generation for what lay waiting for them at the bottom of Kalimdor. Tanaris was always going to be difficult for two young gnomes, and the stories of their grandfathers couldn't help them much here either. The zone was flat and barren, just like the shimmering flats they just left, except where the flats had spread out creatures and passive turtles. Everything in Tanaris wanted to kill these two. Scorpids, basilisks, hyenas, and most dangerous of all, the Sand Fury trolls. The only wisdom that had been imparted unto them was to avoid the east side of Tanaris where the trolls resided. Little gnome legs couldn't outrun a hyena, but they could at least get some distance, whereas trolls could throw axes and execute a gnome on sight. The zone was so densely packed, in fact, that for the first time since they set out from Dun Moreau, Big Red Dog and Help Me the Third were separated from each other, with the younger Help Me finding himself in the same position as his grandfather all those years ago, getting an axe lodged in his back by trolls while basilisks prowled around. Big Red Dog found marginally more success, but not much. While it's true that Tanaris was a mostly flat territory, the few small hills that existed could obscure a scorpid or a basilisk hiding behind it, and indeed, this caused the death of the gnome quite a few times. Having taken his grandfather's advice in avoiding the trolls, though, he was able to make it through the desert nearly twice as fast as his grandfather. It was a painful journey. Every time that his spirit would return to his body, a new creature would be standing right there, ready to rend the two of them apart once again. With persistence, both gnomes made it to the hill overseeing the crater, and in a move reminiscent of the wetlands, jumped from the hill, hoping for a better place to leave their spirits. And this time, it actually worked. They found themselves amidst dinosaur bones, in the zone touted by their grandfathers as being worse than hell. For the last time, I'm going to bring us back to the original run done by Clifford and the first Help Me, as the young ones learned more about Ungoro Crater than any other area, thanks to the stories of their grandfathers. The crater is a lush jungle containing dinosaurs, tar beasts, apes, and sentient plants, and is the only way to gain access to Silithus, the true destination for this treacherous journey. The problem is, there is only one very specific entrance to Silithus, along the northwestern border of the area. For a 3-foot-tall gnome, the archway is anything but obvious, and there are many deceptive mountain paths that look as though they could be the entrance, but instead lead towards more hungry dinosaurs. When the grandfathers arrived at Ungoro Crater, they thought they knew what they were doing, and where they were going, but ended up getting stuck in the crater longer than almost every other area combined, for one simple reason. They got lost. There are some relatively safe paths through the crater, but the second that those routes are strayed from, death awaits. And death most certainly found their grandfathers, as they foolishly tried to walk directly through the center of the crater. Time and time again they were eaten by dinosaurs, pterodaxes and dimetrodons especially. After reaching a point where even taking a single step took multiple minutes, the grandfathers decided to try a different route and hug the mountains on the outskirts of the crater, hoping to stumble onto the Silithus entrance. This only resulted in them getting eaten by unseen dinosaurs hiding in the cliffs. Worse yet, after an hour of running around, getting eaten, returning their spirits to their bodies, and then getting eaten again, they ran directly past the Silithus entrance, too scared to climb another hill after the last 5 times where they were tricked and eaten. This caused them to waste another 2.5 hours before finally making it to Silithus, sufficiently traumatized now. As such, when they told their grandchildren these stories and found out they wanted to make the same journey, Clifford and the elder Help Me made sure that their grandchildren knew the way through the crater, and quadruple-checked that they had the Silithus entrance marked on their maps. The safest route through the crater is to follow roughly along the mountains from the dinosaur graveyard, but not too close. Staying near the groups of neutral plant creatures and keeping a sharp eye out for the few dimetrodons that roam the same area was key to surviving. Once our heroes reached the tar pits, they had to walk more carefully as to not anger the tar beasts, but by sticking in between the mountains and the tar pits, while standing very close to trees in order to confuse anything that did notice them, they made it to the human encampment in the crater hundreds of times faster than their grandfathers ever did. From here, though, there was some unavoidable pain. The safest path involved following the mountains, but as was well documented, the mountains could hide dangerous creatures. Those creatures took their lives a few times. But despite this, our heroes trudged on. And thanks to the insistence of their grandfathers, they knew exactly where the Silithus gate was, making it through the crater in a matter of minutes, rather than hours. Upon seeing the land of Silithus, Big Red Dog and Help Me the Third were reminded how grave their mission truly was. Their grandfathers had come here as glorified tourists, but now, the two of them were here to stop an invasion, or at least to try. They'd heard tales of the Scarab Gong, and knew that ringing it would be necessary to get behind the gates to an ancient city called Ahn'Qiraj, where the old god threat lay dormant for now. If they could get behind those gates before the creature awoke, maybe they would be able to save their whole world. And thus, they set off for the Cenarian Hold, the one area of respite in the entire doomed land that was Silithus. The one nice thing about this zone being home to such big threats is that much of the wildlife was already dead or gone. It was a somber journey from the hold to the Scarab Gong. The two gnomes knew they likely wouldn't return from this journey. Trudging across the sand, many thoughts raced through their minds. Would their spirits still be able to find their bodies if they were killed by an old god? Or would losing here result in true death for them? How would they deal with the minions of the old god, or for that matter, the god itself, were it to wake up before they could deal the killing blow? None of that mattered just yet, though. They needed to ring the gong and open the gates. With feet tired and covered in sand, they came upon the great gates of Ahn'Qiraj, and the Scarab Gong itself. And this is where the folly of the gnomes comes true. They may have made it all the way here. They may have had the spirit to kill the old god, but they didn't have the means. They were too poor to afford a mallet to ring the gong with, and even if they could, they were both too weak to wield it. Disheartened, they both began scouring the hills for any other way into the city of Ahn'Qiraj, to no avail. All hope seemed lost, until Big Red Dog remembered what their biggest advantage had been up to this point. Their indomitable spirit. He called over Help Me the Third and devised a plan. Up until now, they had both done their best to avoid the wildlife at every turn, and enjoyed areas where it refused to roam. But now, they would need to make use of it. There was a single scorpid that was anywhere near the old city. The plan was for Big Red Dog to keep its attention and bring it over to those cursed, ever-closed gates, where it would strike the both of them down in the hopes that their spirits could cross the impassable border and still do what they set out to do. Despite all odds, with some practice, it actually worked, and the scorpid was baited over to the gates. With one final spirit world run across yet another desert, their incorporeal forms were able to pass right through the physical barrier barring their way. These two lowly, unassuming gnomes, they had done it. They made their way into the city of Ahn'Qiraj and were ready to take down the old god lurking inside. Now, I won't bore you with that story, for frankly it was much too easy for them. Having gotten the drop on the old god, and with their wealth of experience from the journey leading up to this point, it was taken down before it could even wake up, and before they knew it, they were back outside by the gate they had just passed through. Astute listeners will remember, though, that this story is a tragedy after all. Yes, the gnomes made it here, and yes, they did defeat the old god, saving many, maybe even the entire world. But nobody would remember them, or even know what they'd done. They had no way to get home, and no way to even die now. They were locked behind the very same gate meant to keep them out. The gate that, were it opened, the old god would have most certainly awakened, now served as their prison. With no way out, and no money to get home even if they could get out, our heroes were left trapped in an ancient city of bugs, with nothing to keep them company but each other and the few corpses they left behind. Maybe someday, someone more prepared will come by with a mallet, ring the gong, and save them. But it's more likely that they're going to starve to death, dying in obscurity, with only a select few knowing of their heroics.